discussing the topic from likes to lawsuits, influencers, social media, and the law. My name is Alison Laxton. I'm the CEO of the Regenesis Law School and an admitted attorney of the High Court, and it's my pleasure to be your hostess today. I'm joined by a wonderful panel of experts who will hopefully give you plenty of insight into this very interesting topic. Eytan Stern, I'd like to introduce you. He is the founder and director of Legalese and has successfully helped over 5,000 companies grow legally and safely by combining creativity and the law. He's a passionate commercial lawyer and has worked across multiple industries with over 11 years of experience. These clients in these industries include clients in media, fintech, and fashion, and a range of other industries. He's also hosted various radio and TV segments such as Hammond Time with Nick Hammond on 5FM and Espresso TV. He writes articles, runs webinars, and speaks at events about how to grow a business safely and legally. And he has a podcast called Big Fish Stories, which focuses on business stories. So Eytan, welcome, and thank you for being part of our panel today.
Such a pleasure. Nice to be here.
Next up, I have Mr. Pieter Groenewald, and Pieter is the CEO of Infinity. Now, Infinity is SA's #1 influencer marketing group. He's an experienced CEO with a demonstrated track record and over 18 years of experience. He's also been involved in the founding of The Salt, which is a nano-influencer platform, and is well expertised in this industry to come and chat to us today. So, Pieter, welcome. We're really lucky to have you on board, and we're looking forward to your contributions.
Thanks, Alison. Also looking forward to the conversation.
And next up, we have Ms. Sadia Rizvi. Now, Sadia is an admitted attorney who practices at PPM Attorneys. She is currently doing her LLM through UKZN and obtained her LLB at UKZN. Now, she specializes in various areas of law, including corporate law, regulatory compliance, IT and communications law, data protection law, and media and advertising law. So, Sadia, we just want to welcome you and your vast experience. We're really delighted to have a practicing attorney on board on these panels with us, and we're looking forward to the value you'll add today. So welcome from us all.
Thank you, Alison. It's a pleasure to be here.
And next up, we have Mary Jane Mphatlele. Now, Mary Jane is an admitted attorney of the High Court. She obtained her LLB from UNISA. She also holds a diploma in journalism and an advanced certificate in commercial contracting. And she heads up the civil litigation, estates, media law, and insolvency departments in her law firm. And it's wonderful to have not only an attorney, but an entrepreneur with us today, and a female entrepreneur at that. So Mary Jane, a huge warm welcome. We're looking forward to having you on board.
Thank you so much, Alison. I'm looking forward to this session.
Now, let's kick off with a nice question from our panel. We've heard the buzzword an influencer, and there seems to be a lot of confusion, especially amongst those who don't want to give away our age, as to what is an influencer. You know, this is a type of career that never existed 20 years ago and has sprung up with the rise of TikTok and Instagram and various social media platforms. So, how have you, as panelists, seen the influencer rise as a type of career type? And maybe if you want to tell us in your mind what an influencer actually is.
Should I kick off, Alison?
Absolutely. Over to you.
So if you think about it, in the influencer world, the way we look at it is every person out there is an influencer. So you get different categories of influencers. It starts off what I refer to as a pyramid. The top of the pyramid is your really large people with a large following, your celebrities, your macro influencers. And that's around about 2015 where that type of influencer started being monetized in a significant way. But what happened in markets is that soon it was only at the time the really big influencers that could partake and the really rich brands that could afford those collaborations. But market forces soon force us to open other categories of influencers. So you open up the micro influencers, more brands could partake. And today we see phenomenal growth in the nano influencer channel. And the reason for that, because this has actually become a mechanic for word of mouth, which was always the strongest form of advertising. But people lack the ability to ignite it. And I think influencer marketing is really today the opportunity to ignite again. It's the mechanic for word of mouth, which brands just love to put a human voice to their brand communication.
Thank you, Peter. So you talk about these influencers being in a triangle, and I think that's super interesting. And I think we've seen, different ways now in which social media is being used. Now, we think of Facebook, and we think back to, when some of us were in university, we had really embarrassing photos on our Facebook or pictures of your family and friends, and it was quite an intimate social media platform. Now, how have influencers really changed the way in which we use social media?
So I think it's just to continue on that. What has happened is people started specializing. So there's also a statistic out there that 1% of people create content on social media platforms. 9% of people engage with that content. And the bulk of the people, 90% of them, purely observe content on social media. So once you've put yourself out as a creator or influencer, it starts off by you creating content. And then people specializes in the type of content they create. So that's why I'm steering away from numbers, because if you, for instance, I often use this example. If you're a mom that's got an ADHD child, and that's the bulk of your content is around your experience of raising this child, and you've got 3,000 followers, it makes you pretty influential in the parent world of ADHD kids, for instance. So but first of all is you got to be a content creator. There's no way you can enter the world of influencer marketing by being an observer or an engager. You got to put yourself out there by creating content.
Thank you, Peter. Would anybody else from the panel like to maybe add their observations of what they find an influencer to be, and maybe how it's changing the way in which we use and interact with social media?
Yeah, I'm not going to jump in. And again, I mean, from the marketing side, I'm really no expert. I probably fall more into the category that you're talking about, where my social media is full of embarrassing photos and messages to my dog and pictures of my favorite band and stuff like that. So, but from a legal point of view, like I think there's been an interesting shift which has happened in the world, which is that social media has turned from something. Well, a couple of things. First of all, social media has turned from this fun thing that you used to engage with friends to like a global kind of window into trends, into culture, into all of us, our people. And with that, there's lots of stuff which arises from that, right? Like as we are all kind of on show, and as we have instant access into, we can give people instant access into our lives. There's legal implications to that, for the things that we do. Look, there's always legal implications to the things that we do, and so that's a big thing. The other things, what essentially happened is brands figured out how to monetize social media, and when there's monetization of something, there's a commercialization of it, right? So suddenly there's business that happens through social media, because now influencers are little micro entrepreneurs, or sometimes macro big entrepreneurs. So people have essentially figured out how to monetize. The brands have essentially figured out how to monetize, which has really changed the nature of it. But yeah, I think so there's been the sort of big shift. So I think in our work, what we've seen is there's a lot more of the work that we see with brands is that them engaging people to push their message, to push a certain messages which they want, and paying people to do that, which obviously leads to, like any business, leads to legal implications and legal activity around that. So yeah, and I mean, my personal view is I don't think it's a massive. It's not that the world's shifted too much. Like we've always talked about thought leaders, and we've always looked up to certain people. I think what the internet did is it democratized it in a way that now we can look up to anyone for better or for worse. Right? You don't have to be a thought leader and have an interesting perspective in order to be looked up to. You can be someone that just likes doing stupid videos, but now suddenly you've garner a commercial power on the internet. So it's an interesting time to be involved in social media more intensely.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I think we've seen really interesting things. I know for me, it was a big shock when I was asked to draft an influencer contract. And I thought, well, where do I even start? This is not something I covered when I studied law and when I went to law school. And I think that there's also going to be a huge sort of shift around the services that us, attorneys and those in law and even those who run companies like Mr. Peter Groenewald does to clients to really think of their legal standing. And I think this sort of brings me to my next question for the panel, which is we make funny videos, we become very popular, we get 50,000 followers and then 100,000 followers. And before you know it, you're a household name on Instagram or TikTok for whatever videos or content you create. But what are the legalities of being an influencer? We may have influencers watching this today who have possibly never consulted an agency, who've never consulted a social media specialist or an attorney, and they just don't know what the implications are. So perhaps if you want to guide me as the panel as to what liability can you attract and what sort of legalities are involved in being an influencer.
Can I jump in there?
Over to you, Sadia.
From my research and general reading, there's no specific laws that regulate how influencers can conduct advertising and promotions and so on. But there are general laws that will regulate how advertising is done on social media platforms. So the first piece of legislation is the Consumer Protection Act. And then this act says that if you are conducting any type of sponsored content, that content will be considered as advertising. And then the act also goes on to say that if you as an influencer are promoting any type of goods or services, you must also let the public know or let your followers know that you are being sponsored or paid to conduct these promotions. So very practically, the way you can do this as an influencer is to use these hashtags containing the words either sponsored or advertisement or ad to sufficiently meet this requirement under the Consumer Protection Act. And then if the influencer does not disclose this, they can be held legally liable for the non-disclosure. And then secondly, the Act also says that the advertising must be fair and reasonable, and it should not suggest false or misleading representations of the products or services that you are advertising. So you cannot exaggerate capabilities or the performance of a particular product or service. My advice would be, stick to the facts that you have at hand. And then secondly, another piece of regulation is the Social Media Code of Conduct. And this is the code of conduct that has been published by the Advertising Regulatory Board. But this code of conduct will only apply if the brand is a member of the ARP. But the ARP still has the power to make decisions or rulings where a complaint is lodged against a brand. And as you know, this can deeply harm a brand's reputation. And then I would also strongly suggest that this code of conduct is considered whenever you're considering advertising on social media platforms.
Thank you, Sadia. So I think you've given whoever's watching today quite a lot to think about. And I can guarantee that a lot of influencers who have done videos and who promote products probably haven't thought about all the legislation and the various codes of conduct you've been speaking about. And perhaps for my other panelists, have there been instances where you've had to deal with influencers attracting liability, or how do you sort of manage that? Giving them a heads up before they come in and work with you, perhaps.
We certainly, sorry, you go for it. Go for it, Jane. Sorry. No, you go for it.
Thank you so much. So, my firm, we deal with social media law, which I would love to believe that my colleagues here would share that it's a branch of law that it's just relatively new. And as my other colleagues just previously highlighted, there isn't a lot of regulations around the industry as a whole. So we as a firm would be trying to sort of create that segment, develop it, and hopefully there will be more legislation related to the Consumer Protection Act and just the guidelines that are issued by the Advertising Regulation Board. But when dealing with influencers, I have not dealt with the influencers that had a problem per se to be assisted with in the terms of getting sued or just yes, getting sued. But I have dealt with influencer contracts, and with these contracts, we always want to make sure that we stray away the influencer from trouble as possible, and we would have some interesting terms in there just to go through it. Their scope of the work, payment, and usage rights. These are terms that, when influencers working on the brand, they are able to know that this is what the influencer is needing, the power that the influencer is giving us with regards to their work. And, those contracts would also speak of brand guidelines and affiliation clause and the payment terms. Because that's usually a point of conflict for most of campaigns when it comes to influencers and brands.
Thank you, Mary Jane.
Yeah, maybe I can just add to that, because we've dealt with a couple of situations where things have gone wrong, where it's come back to bite influencers. And I think, like, if you look on a big scale, so in America and the US, there was this FTX, which is this crypto site that went bust. And there were quite a few, there's a couple of influencers that had promoted the site and hadn't disclosed that. I think even Kim Kardashian might have been one of them, and got quite a serious penalty for doing that. So I think that, as Sadia was saying, like, disclosing when you're advertising is very important. And I think, like, often if there isn't regulations on your country's law, like, that specific social media site is going to have regulations around it or going to have rules around it. It's really important if you get involved in paid promotion to understand what rules are being governed for. Right. And then the second thing is, and this is where we have seen things go wrong, is so influencers signs up to do a promotion for an alcohol brand as an example, but then what you need to understand, like, once you are using your social media for promoting a brand, it's to some extent no longer your social media, right? Like, you are now renting it out to some extent to these brands. So, in one case, an influencer had promoted one specific alcohol brand, and then the next week there's pictures of him sitting in a bar drinking another brand, a competitor brand. And so our client, we represented the agency, had a serious issue with that. And said, you got paid a lot of money to promote the brand, you can't promote the competitor. And the reaction, this response was, well, it's my free speech, I can do what I want. And that's just no longer the case, right? Like, once you're contractually bound into doing something, to promoting a brand, to keeping your reputation in a certain way, then suddenly that becomes your business. And you need to kind of live up to whatever the terms of the contract are. The other case that we dealt with was someone who was involved in a more family-related brand. They were pushing a family brand. And then there were photos on their Instagram which were not very family-friendly. And the brand had a problem, and the brand went back up. This influencer's conduct that essentially caused damage to their clients, to this brand. And the brands took exception with that and wanted payment for that, wanted to be paid back. So, I think it's like, in many ways, like, this influencer world, seen as a quick way to make some money because we all have social media and it's a free way. It's like a very easy way to promote something. You do a few posts and it's hard to believe that that can be the extent of the work you have to do. But the influencers that I've seen do really well, ones that work really hard, that manage their personal profiles really well. And the ones that I've seen either come fly by nights or make a few bucks and then that's that, or lose a lot of money and get into trouble are the ones that kind of treat it just like it's a very simple thing. They can do what they want. So I think the barrier to entry on the market is a good thing because anyone can do it, but it's also a dangerous thing because like every career or like whenever someone's going to pay you a lot of money, there's consequences to it.
Maybe I can just, from a creator or influencer perspective, two things that outside what Sadia was saying is that you got to be aware of like copyright infringement. So the content that you use in terms of images and the music and things like that, that it's clear to be used. That's something that we often come across where people are using material that, from an imagery perspective, it's not as big a risk because you should create content. But then when you're creating content, there's also the privacy laws, or just to respect other people in the imagery. So when a mom is having family and stuff in a post, for instance, make sure you've got the authorization of having them being displayed in your social media. So because otherwise that can come back to haunt you as well. Then I think what companies like us do is it's become very sophisticated. So most of I would say 90% of influencer work being done today is being done through platforms. And within that platform, you've got history around influencers. You've got standard contracts that's already been approved by attorneys that cover all the sensitive areas of such a collaboration, for instance. And then also their brands can establish from previous collabs if other brands were being aligned to before. And then if exclusivity clauses seek that say for the next 3 months, you're only representing my brand, you're only being seen in public with my brand, then obviously that's a contractual obligation that you can't shy away from. But I think it's to disclose these things to influencer and brand upfront is important because that way, people do understand the ramification if anyone breached this very formalized contract that's been entered into. So because it's a commercial contract and like Etienne was saying, is you got to understand if you start commercializing your audience, which you've grown, there's responsibilities to that, and also your personal profile, you need to protect it vigorously. Otherwise, the commercial opportunity will fall away.
So thank you, Peter. I think you've given some really good tips there. And, what I guess I'd ask is then, if you're an influencer and you're just coming into this industry or, everybody now who is termed a Gen Z seems to know exactly how social media works, how TikTok works. And they often want to pursue this as a career path. I had a conversation with a teacher the other day who said, well, we actually have students who come to us and say, I want to be an influencer. That's what I want to do. And what sort of, personal tips would you give these guys? Should they come and consult with agencies before they undergo things like this? What sort of advice would you give to influencers wanting to break into the market before they start? I think Eitan mentioned there that he had an issue with someone getting into trouble. And perhaps if they consulted and been properly briefed, they wouldn't have been, in hot water. So I guess what I want to ask the panel is, what sort of advice would you give them and guidance would you give them, even if that means coming to you for advice?
Can I just go with this? So from a personal experience as an influencer, I've started in the industry since 2015 when there was still so much time who were getting paid to I'd say for anyone who's looking to get into the influencing world, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or Twitter, you need to know what niche you want to go into. You good to research about that niche, but also you need to do something that you're passionate about. Something that when you wake up and want to post a piece of content doesn't feel like a job. It just feels like you're just sharing part of your life or part of that aspect of your life with your followers. So do some research on the platforms that you use as well. The algorithm on Instagram has been difficult for Instagram influencers. But if you do watch people who do lessons on how to, get the algorithm right, see that there's a lot of YouTube videos on how to get on top of the algorithm on Instagram, on TikTok, and on Twitter as well. You will just have to also just do some research on, say, you're a chef and you want to post some of your work on Twitter. You obviously have to research on what makes content like that get more engagement on Twitter as opposed to Instagram.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Would any other panelists like to maybe contribute?
No, I think there's a lot of information available online. We've recently the SALT platform that I've been involved with. 94% of the people we deploy on brand collaborations there is their first time they've ever engaged a brand. So this is like from a nano influencer perspective, it's a quite a soft landing into the world of influencing because people take your hand throughout the process. And we'll also make a lot of content available on the platform for people to upskill themselves. Not only, how you do it, but how you can do it better. What are the tips and tricks that you should try and things like that. So we take a huge responsibility in releasing what I call this bottom of the pyramid group of influencers into the market. And then what you'll find is like what Mary Jane was saying is, if your content path is around something that you're really specializing in and passionate about, and you create regular content, the audience building starts taking place. I would also caution against trying to go across all platforms initially, but that you do keep an eye on your primary platform and then start developing your secondary platforms. Because all the platforms are different in the type of content you need to push out. But that way, you can't be too dependent on any one platform because you don't know how these platforms will treat you down the line. So yeah, that's sort of, for me, a key thing is that you do, if you on a daily basis must create content, do it about something that you know well and very passionate about. So otherwise it becomes a huge job at the end of the day.
Thank you, Peter. And I think, Sadia, you also did want to contribute as well.
Yeah, so just again, speaking from a legal perspective, I would say try and be as transparent as possible when you're creating and posting your content. You need to distinguish between normal content that you're regularly posting between advertising and sponsored posts that you are doing. And then secondly, you also need to consider the type of wording that you use, just to clearly state that something or a piece of advertising it actually is advertising and it is sponsored, and try and clearly explain the relationship that you have with the brand that is sponsoring you. And then if you're also provided with free goods or services from a brand, I think you should actually disclose this to your followers and your audience as well. And then in creating your content, another thing to think about is trying not to be too overtly positive about the particular product or service. And then also being aware of who your audience is and the reach that you have, because sometimes you might make certain statements which might have a very significant impact on your audience, your followers, and they might take it quite a bit seriously, and it might have some negative impact on them. And then lastly, making sure that the contract that you sign with the brand, it protects you and it protects the brand as well.
Can I also just add something in just to give the counter opinion to what everyone else is saying, just to maybe be controversial or maybe just speaking as an old guy, and take it from where it comes. But I'd say if your question is like, how do you get into the influencer career? My suggestion is to be, don't do it. And I'll tell you why, for a couple of reasons. I think firstly, like, I think that it's too risky of a place to peg your life at this point in time. And then I think, like, to a large extent, the influencer generation is something which is time limited. The internet is changing quickly, and you might be like, I think if you were asking that question 5 years ago, I think it might have been a good question. But I think at this point, we don't know where the internet goes, and I don't think the internet looks the same in 5 years' time. Certainly not in 10 years' time, as it does right now. So I think if you're at the point in university and deciding where to push your career, if you're thinking to jump onto a trend that is kind of on its way out, I think like that might be a dangerous thing for your career. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I think, like, if I think about the influencer world, my best piece of advice is be someone who's got something to say about something. And this is kind of following on what Mary Jane was saying. Like, the influencers that are out there that are just creating rubbish to put onto the internet has enough rubbish. But the influencers that do really well are ones that have something that people want to follow, that influence people. So whether you're a lawyer and you want to influence people around that career, or whether you are a musician or a brilliant DJ or an artist, and you want to showcase what you're doing and influence people to go that direction, I think that then there's space for it. But if you're saying all I want to be is be famous, I don't think that's a very good starting point to start a career from, and I don't think you'll have a successful career, because I think the world is smarter than that, and I think there's enough people out there that just want to be famous for us to ignore. So be someone who's got something to say, and I think people will listen and follow you. That's my piece of advice from an old guy.
Thank you. Peter, here we go.
Maybe just to get in onto that, I do agree to a lot what you're saying. So I think as in the broad, like fashion, beauty, there's oversupply of creators versus the demand in that space. But in more specialist verticals like health, fitness, and even professional sort of occupancies and stuff, and teaching, we're very thin in that space. And from where we're sitting, we can see that this influencer era is going to move into a creator era. And there's still a huge growth opportunity there, because we don't rely so much on the distribution channels of these influencers anymore, which means we just rely on human voice to a brand message. And I think in that space, if you look at the investment that's going into it and the tools that's being created, there's still a lot of runway there. And not everyone will do it at the end of the day. It will really be concentrated to that 1% of people that's comfortable to create content, because it's not for everyone. So yeah, I would never, even my own children and people that I'm engaged with, it doesn't start as a career. It starts as a hobby. Then it moves into a side hustle. And then ultimately it can become a career. So a lot of people are being sifted out downstream through the side hustle and the hobby element of it.
Thank you, panelists. That's been some really, really nice feedback there. And I think some good tips given to anyone who's listening today who is thinking, do I go into this, or do I promote products, and how can I make money out of this? Should I even make money out of this, or should I just listen to my parents who want me to study law and go study law? So really, really interesting. Thank you, panelists. My next question now, sort of, Aiton, you've mentioned that the internet changes so quickly, and we've seen rapid developments, especially with AI and with things that are coming in that we never thought possible. ChatGPT, really being something else that people are absolutely, besotted with at the moment. So what sort of changes have you as panelists seen now that you never thought would be possible maybe 10 or 20 years ago, especially those of you who are more seasoned?
Do you mean just in terms of influencers or in terms of our careers in general?
Your careers, influences, I think your industry is so ever evolving that anything that you've possibly witnessed that you were like, wow, that was something I never thought would happen.
Maybe I can, in the influencer world, what has happened, if you think about 10 years ago, all audience channels belong to corporates. So you either had to access the audiences through buying a newspaper ad, or having a radio station ad, or a TV ad. Those were the ways that marketers traditionally access audiences. It was via corporate audience channels. But what social media enabled is on a platform like Facebook, it allows people to build their own communities, so what we call their social tribes. And all of a sudden, some of them have started growing this. And what happened was this social media was created for people-to-people engagement, not really for advertisers. Advertisers was a way of monetizing social media platforms. But the advertiser cannot belong to these social tribes. So what has started happening is brands were looking and saying, instead of sitting outside the tribe shouting in with advertising, let me introduce my brand authentically into the conversation by someone that belongs to that tribe. And that is a big change, because all of a sudden, brands now can have a human voice to their messaging, which is something that wasn't available before. It was very cold, sort of one-directional communication. And that has changed. So it's become two-directional today, because the consumer's got a voice as well. And just how they've embraced it, I almost haven't seen a marketing strategy in the last sort of 2 years which don't have an influencer element on it. So it means brands they are trialing this, they're testing it, they're experimenting with it, and it's just growing at this stage, because people understand how to leverage trust and authenticity to the benefit of brands. And that's in my mind one of the biggest changes.
Thank you, Peter. Anybody else who's witnessed some interesting changes that they'd like to make mention of?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I think there's, like, I want to answer this in two ways. I think there's some things which are incredible, right? Like you're pointing out ChatGPT. I don't think even a year ago you could have told me something like that would exist. But I think in the legal tech world in general, like there are some incredible products out there which certainly when we were learning about law in law school, no one could have conceptualized these things. They're tools for research, they're tools for project management, for practice management, they're tools for drafting. We've been experimenting with, they call them CLM software, contract lifestyle management software, which, at some point will effectively move lawyers off our favorite program, which is like Word, like get us to stop drafting in Word. And so I think there's some amazing programs that are out there. The other thing, which I think even just before the pandemic, we thought, we were wondering if anyone would ever tolerate a lawyer who was remote and was digital. Now, just a few years later, we're completely digital and remote, and if the client wants to meet in person, I'm always a bit suspicious. So that's been a big shift for me in the way that people expect their lawyer to arrive at work. But the other answer to my question is, I think in some ways the legal profession moves slow, and in some ways it is still very much the same profession that certainly I entered into 10 years ago. And I don't think, people are always theorizing that lawyers will be the first to go through AI, and they'll get replaced by a robot, and you can have clients that are able to do their legal work without lawyers. I play around with a lot of software, and I look at everything that I come across, and I'm yet to see a good application of that. In many ways, the legal industry has moved slow, and I think it will continue to move slow. So yeah, in some ways technology has really shifted it, but in other ways, lawyers will be lawyers.
Thank you so much. Anybody else who'd like to contribute? Satya, Mary Jane?
Just from my perspective, I haven't been in the legal industry for very long. But from my experience, I'm based in a technology law firm, and one of the few firms that have embraced technology properly, I would say. Since COVID started, we were fully remote, and we were able to go remote very quickly in a very short period of time. And then secondly, we were also quite advanced in how we use computers and technology, and we're one of the few paperless law firms that's around. So that's just been my experience, and from my colleagues' experience, we all quite. I know generally lawyers are not so hesitant to embrace technology and embrace new ways of doing things, but from my side, we've been quite good with it, I would say.
Thank you, Sadia. So, yeah, I think the concept of a paperless law
Recording in progress.
Something that you would have never thought possible before. And, you know, also lawyers have to learn that in order to service these types of clients who are newly emerging, we have to catch up to. It's very important for us to stay on top of what is happening, what changes are happening. There's been so many developments, even you'll see in the US, they had a AI, lawyer bot, and things like that are coming and really are changing the landscape and the influences that we will service and the industries that we will service. So I just want to now maybe touch on influencer strategies. And Peter, you mentioned that most businesses now have an influencer strategy in their marketing strategies. Now, maybe you can tell us a bit about what an influencer strategy is for those who don't know, and how can you use an influencer strategy to actually grow your business?
So yeah, I mean, as your strategy is the starting point of it. It's essentially, what is my media plan around this? So that's where considerations come in. First of all, what is my objective here? If it's awareness, then it makes sense at the launch stage of a product to use perhaps a bigger type of influencer who's got a little bit of punch. So that's where celebrities and them come in. But sometimes a product has been launched and you might be battling with sell-through post the event. And that's where you start looking for an endorsement strategy or a testimonial strategy. Now that wouldn't come authentically coming from a bigger influencer, because people know they get paid to do that post. But that's where you deploy sometimes more smaller influencers that gives you that real authentic experiences they're having with the product. So you find those individuals that's already fans of that particular brand. And that would then be a pro strategy of launching with a bigger and then following up with a. Then where do you direct traffic? Because what's my ultimate goal? So if I'm a pharmaceutical product that boosts the immune system, people's not going to see a post, or the informed market are not going to see a post and rush out to Dis-Chem or Clicks to buy it. People first want to educate them more around the product. So that's where you then direct them to a place which still digital awareness, but where you can learn more about the product, because that creates a stickiness that the next time you're into the retailer, you might be looking for the product. But sometimes we love e-commerce fulfillment type of product, because I can send you directly to where you can transact with the brand. And it becomes very easy then to report on those outcomes. And then when you've got those broad sort of key objectives, then it comes to, what is the collab look like? What type of influencer will fit this? What is my target market? Because one thing we always look for in influencer marketing is relatability to the target market. I'm not going to influence 21-year-olds about what fashion they should wear. That's just not going to happen. So if I need to influence 21 years old, I need to deploy people that represent that target market. Because we get influenced by three sources in life. It's people we know and connected to. Secondly, people we relate to. And the third source is someone trying to sell us something. And that's normally the brand's job. So those are the factors in a strategy. Then the ones of tech. Because normally when we do tactical campaigns, you look for mechanics that can scale your content and give you access to earned media. So it's quite involved, and it's become quite sophisticated over the years. But there's definitely a lot of thought behind before you see the post coming onto Instagram or Facebook perhaps.
Thank you, Peter. So, wow, you've given some amazing tips there for anyone who's wondering what are the things that you should put in an influencer strategy. And I think that the use of influencer strategies are so carefully thought out, and we've touched on it before. Sadia mentioned that you can touch a demographic and say something that's really offensive, and you didn't think about that. So it is very important to identify your target market, to know which influencers you're using, because they really do become the face of the brand. And we've spoken about the liability. You as the influencer could promote something that might be seen as very offensive or very derogatory or become very controversial, and you have to be willing to be associated with that. So really interesting to have influencers now doing the work of what we used to do on adverts, radio channels and TVs. So I don't know if anybody else, perhaps Ethan, if you want to add how you can grow your business through these strategies.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think thought leadership is always a good thing. I use LinkedIn a lot, right? And we communicate with people on LinkedIn, connect, tell people what you think. And I think back to that saying, like, people people work with people that they like. And so there's some aspect that, like, people, if whatever career you're in, whatever your business does, you need to build your network, build your community. I think that one of my theories in the way the internet moves is as there's more and more rubbish out there and more and more junk information, as you have bots just creating tons of content and putting it out there in videos, and you don't need to get an influencer because you can get a bot to create a person to be that influencer. Like, I think that people start building communities, and people start using communities to market themselves and to find service providers. So certainly the way that I think about it with my business is like we build communities, we interact with other business owners, partners, organizations that we see a common thread with. That's why I said yes to being part of this today, because it's an interesting conversation with other like-minded people. So for me, I don't know if you call that influencing, or if you call that networking, or if you call that just doing things that interest you. But like, that's always been the strategy that we've used to grow our business. And I think that as the technology changes, that strategy stays the same, but it looks different. So whereas a few years ago, that would have been, going out and playing rounds of golf, or would have been going out to parties or to events and hobnobbing. And then at some point that would have been, when social media and Facebook came out, that might have been interacting with people on Facebook. And years later, that's probably for my stage of my business and my age, that's probably more about LinkedIn or business communities that I like. So I think that, I'm always reminded that there's I think a lot of people, just to put it bluntly, I think that a lot of people want to become influencers because they see it as an easy way they are influenced by other influencers. That it looks like a very easy life, and you get to these fun things, and brands give you things. As I said, the influencers that I've seen are successful work bloody hard. They put a lot of time and effort into creating content. They're very focused on the business side. They've upskilled themselves on the business side, and they run it like a business. And I don't think there's any shortcut to that. So, I'm not looking to be an influencer, but I'm looking to grow my business. And I know part of that means interacting with the community around me. So yeah, that's how I think about it. I think that's work that we're all going to have to do if we grow our business, but you need to decide what it looks like. And there's no shortcuts. Unfortunately, just the one thing to add, the problem is that there are going to be that 0.1% of people who just get it awesome, who make it Instagram famous and get the brands get back there, and they make us think that it's possible for us, but it's probably not. And I think that the world is better served by people thinking what value they can add in, not just by thinking that the value is the influencing. You know what I mean?
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I think there is still that aspect of you have to work hard. Nothing worth having should come easy, and certain people do. Like you said, the 0.1%.
It's the same. Sorry, just add one more thing. It's the same with musicians, right? Like we've got people, you know, we still do a fair bit of work in the music industry, and you've got people that say, like, cool, I want to become a musician or DJ because, like, it'd be amazing to just play music for a living. But the musicians are playing music for a living like 5% of their time, and the other 95% of the time is built on business strategy, raising capital, practicing that music, writing that music, forming partnerships, developing marketing strategies. So there's a lot more that goes into it. And the successful musicians that I've seen are unbelievable business people. I mean, the greatest one, just the last example, the greatest influencer of our time is probably Taylor Swift. Now, Taylor Swift is a genius. She's a business genius. She has a huge following and monetizes that following like in the most pure, perfect way. She is the CEO of her own business. And I think, like, you know, I'm just using her as an example to say, like, the best people, the ones that are the best at this, are the smartest.
Thank you, Eitan. So I think, yeah, we can look at some of these massive influences, and I think there's so much work that goes on behind the scenes that we, if you are an aspiring influencer, would have to commit to, and it's not something that is simply an overnight success. There's a lot of thought and a lot of thinking that has to go, and planning that has to go into these sort of things. So I just want to now pose my question perhaps to Sadia and Mary Jane, and if anybody else would like to jump in. But we spoke a bit about the legislation and what current legislation we've got, which, let's be honest, by now it probably is outdated at the rate that technology and social media is changing. But do you feel that legislation adequately protects the So, sorry, let me just get back to that. But do you feel that the legislation adequately protects influencers, and what do we need to develop further to make legislation sufficient?
Can I just come in first? So what I've seen with my clients and some of the colleagues that I work with in the media space, where we need more protection is in terms of the relationship just between the brand and the influencer. We see every day that brands get someone, an agency, to do a campaign and call on influencers, but you find that there's always a disconnect when the brand doesn't pay on time and the agency therefore doesn't pay the influencer. So I think this is something that we should be looking at in the legal field, to say that when a brand is working with an influencer, these are the protections that the influencer has, and this is what the influencer can do. I think most of these influencers are being frustrated by the lack of protection there, because in most cases you'd find that an influencer has done a campaign for, let's say, the to post 5 tweets and get paid 3,000. If already you don't have an attorney as an influencer who is managing you as a brand, it's kind of, well, fruitless to litigate that 1.5 or 300 that you're owed by a brand. But say, for instance, there's a legislation or just normal framework to say that if a situation like this happens, this is what an influencer can do. So for now, there isn't something like that, and it's just one of the aspects of influencer marketing that I think needs more attention to protect both the influencers and the brands.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Any other panelists who maybe want to speak about any insufficiencies we have in the legislation at the moment?
Can I just come in here? So from my viewpoint, I don't think it's the legislation that's inadequate or insufficient. I think what really matters is the contract that is signed between the brand and the influencer, because those provisions should sufficiently protect both parties if it is properly drafted and properly considered. I mean, even considering the advertising rules and how it will apply to you and how you conduct your advertising on your social media platform. I mean, that's something that really needs to be taken into account, and then very carefully crafting that contract so that both parties are protected and it's very clear, it's very measurable, and you achieve what you set out to do. So that's just from my viewpoint.
Thank you, Sadia. And a follow-up question there, and I have to put you on the spot for this, but what sort of essential terms have to be in these kind of contracts? And I often say to clients, you can draft anything. Your contract is only as strong as when things go wrong. And that's when you find out whether it was a good or bad contract. So, Sadia, what should people really be on the lookout for in these types of contracts?
Yes, so there's quite a bit of things that need to go into this contract. I think it should actually quite clearly outline what the content that is going to be created very clearly, the amount of content, which social media channels are used, the level of engagement required, the format, and so on. I think if you're very clear at the outset about the content and what it entails, then you're starting off on a good foot. And then just in terms of language, it should be very clear. It should be very the goals that the influencer wants to achieve and the brand wants to achieve. It should be measurable and very clearly worded and outlined in the contract itself. And then secondly, the duration. So is it based on a specific period of time, or is it linked to engagement levels, or the number of retweets or reposts that you get, and so on? That's also something that has to be considered. Then payment, when will payment occur? Is it after each post has been posted, or like after the entire set of posts have been gone on the social media platforms? And then another issue is exclusivity, like Peter and Etienne mentioned. Is this influencer allowed to partner with other brands or even a competitor for the duration of the agreement? I think that's something that's very important. And if this is not allowed, then who can they partner with? Can they partner with other brands that are not competitors, and so on? That should be very clearly outlined as well. And then how is engagement going to be handled? Who will be answering to the questions that followers would pose about the product, the service? And then even if there's a competition involved that the influencer is part of and is promoting, then the terms of the competition should be very clearly outlined and also regulated. I mean, here you would seek to consult a lawyer or an attorney to draft your terms and conditions. And then the ownership of the content, who owns it? Can it be reused by the influencer or by the brand? And where does it go after that? Who takes ownership, and so on? And then including protection from liability clauses for the use of the brand. And then lastly, very standard terms such as intellectual property considerations. I think here you have to understand that as the influencer, you are required to ask for permission before you use any material of the brand, and you need to make sure that's clearly outlined in the contract, and that says the influencer has the right to use or is licensed to use the brand, the trademarks, the copyrights, and so on. And then other confidentiality considerations, such as if the influencer is seeing confidential and proprietary information of the company or the brand, how can the company prevent the influencer from revealing that to the general public? And then lastly, all your boilerplates. I mean, but generally my advice would be the contract should be very clear, should be very specific, and then in terms of the content, it should be measurable as well.
Thank you, Sadia. So if anyone's listened to you and they don't know how to do an influencer contract after them, they didn't listen carefully, because you gave us a very, very comprehensive overview there. Peter, over to you.
Yeah, I just think to add to that, one more thing is that we get into our contracts is the confidentiality aspect extends around payment terms as well as when there's a breach in contract, because what happens sometimes is there's a dispute between the brand and the influencer about something. And what you want to protect the brand is for that to go public, because that's a commercial agreement in the back. So we normally insist that any dispute cannot be taken to social media, because there you don't have all the facts in terms like that. So that's something that's very important for us, to protect the brands involved as well as the influencer in that regard.
Big time. Yeah, it's people must remember, it's like you're not using billboards, using live people to do your marketing. And that comes with the risk, and brands have to realize that. So the relationship that you form, there needs to be like a general ethos or a ethics match between the brand and the company, or the brand and the influencer. And both parties, we're very, very strict that neither party can go onto social media and stuff to like disparage each other and use that power which they've been hired to do to affect the brand. But the argument that we always tell the influencers of why not to do that is you'll kill your business very quickly. So you might win win a few bucks on one matter, but that'll be the last time you ever get hired by a brand. And we have seen and killed people's careers based on that.
Wow, interesting and a good take home. So colleagues, we've reached the end of our 1 hour session, and we've just heard such amazing insight, and I have even learned a lot today from my panelists here. And thanks to all of our attendees for being here. I would just like to ask each of my panelists, and I'll start with Eitan, then Sadia, Peter, and Mary Jane. Where can people find you? Where can they find your businesses? How can they reach you if they were interested in perhaps what you spoke about today?
Sure. So my company is called Legalese, like Japanese. Legalese, you can find us on Instagram. You can connect with me. We've got websites. We're not very hard to get hold of. Or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I've chatted to people on LinkedIn.
Thank you, Eitan. Over to you, Sadia. Where can we find you?
So my company's name is PPM Attorneys, or the full name is Kubia Pierce Masitele Attorneys. So you can visit our website at www.ppmattorneys.co.za. You can even give us a call or connect with us on our social media platforms.
Thank you, Sadia. And Peter, where can we find the #1 influencer company in South Africa, Infinity?
I'm active on most social media platforms, but the best to communicate with me is through LinkedIn, because that's where we do our B2B influence. So yeah, you can look for my profile there. Otherwise, also through the website, the Salt Preferential Infinity Influencer. Any of those queries will come through to me.
Thank you, Peter. And Mary Jane, where can we find you? Oh, sorry, we've got you on mute there. There we go.
Sorry, thank you. So if you're looking for my company, which is a law firm, Mary Jane Mphahlele Attorneys, you can find us on www.mjmattorneys.co.za. We have a list of all the services that we offer. But if you're looking to reach out to me personally as an influencer and you'd like some coaching or some tips here and there, you can just check out my Twitter account, which is Mary Jane Explore. On Instagram, Mary Jane Explores.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Well, I just want to say a huge thank you. And on behalf of the Regenesis Law School, it's been an absolute pleasure to host you all today and to hopefully give wonderful insight to our panelists. Thank you to all of my panelists for their time. We wish you well. And thank you for sharing such amazing information with us today. We look forward to hosting you again for our next few webinars. And we hope to see your faces again with the Regenesis Law School webinar series. Thank you, everyone. Keep well.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. All the best. Bye.